I'm actually coming from New Zealand, where I sort of mastered in renewables energy and power systems, working through a state-owned enterprise for a while, and then decided to get into sort of engineering consulting for quite some time as well, to get into the technical side of things. And I really enjoyed doing that kind of work. And then slowly I progressed into doing a bit of project management, and I realized that client problems were more about business rather than the engineering side of things at all. So I decided that it was a good time for a bit of a switch, and I wanted to explore this area a bit more. So I ran a social enterprise as an experiment, and that's when I realized that, okay, I think business knowledge is not something you can just pick up. It probably requires, for me personally, I think I needed a bit more education on the side as well. So this is where the whole MBA journey came through, and I had a mentor who kind of came up with this option, right? Because I could have just done something part-time or read a few books or something like this, and they had done something like this before. So I think that's where the whole journey started for me. And after just doing a bit of research, doing a GMATs and so on, looked at a few schools, and INSEAD was for me the school to go because of 3-4 main reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into later. But that's sort of the gist of the journey. I think he mentioned a couple of things, right? So firstly, he said, I personally wasn't the most technically apt person. So I think he was quite blunt with me, and he just told me, he's like, you're probably not in the top 5%. You're probably in the top 10, 20%, but it's usually the top 5% that do really, really well. So I thought, okay, and that's not something I can get into anyway. It's just because there were some limitations. So I thought, okay, then that means I should listen to him on the different options he was talking about, right? And as I mentioned, I was looking at the social enterprise, and that was the option we also sort of came up with jointly. And he suggested, okay, if you are kind of interested in business, so New Zealand being a very small country, and after my travels, this is some of the things we discussed. I would always say, hey, in Japan, I found a nice sort of one of those capsule motels and stuff like that. And wouldn't it be cool to have that in New Zealand, for instance, right? So I would always have these crazy ideas all the time. And he would say, but you need to think about them a bit more. And for that, you maybe need something formal. And that's why the social enterprise was something we discussed. Maybe give that a go and see if that works. And it didn't, right? So these are the sort of the two things he mentioned and try to execute, if anything. And that's where I think the whole MBA path came through after that journey finished. One of the main things that I actually used was that ability to travel as well. And in that international aspect, right? So I think I started also looking at US schools, but I just felt that most of the class was American based, and then there were not a lot of opportunities for that exchange. Whereas INSEAD having that 6 months in Singapore and 6 months in France was a huge draw. Second thing was the 1 year, because I was sort of a bit on the older side. I was about 29 at that point where I would have started. So I didn't want to be out of the workforce for a couple of years as well, right? So I think those were sort of two key criteria for myself. And also, I guess INSEAD being a consultant heavy in school as well. So this is one of the options I kind of picked up later, and which I didn't mention was before I started the MBA, I also did a pre-MBA internship as well at another startup for just a very brief period. And that's what sort of made me realize that, okay, this is something I do want to do. I thought the international aspect, for sure, I knew it would be there, but it was beyond expectations, right? Because again, coming from New Zealand, I'm used to having a little bit of a diversity in terms of in the work environment, but this was just absolutely nuts, right? When you have over 80 plus nationalities, and each one of them has a bit of a mix, right? Because there's a 3 language requirement, pretty much. Right, so I know one of my really good friends. She's spent significant amount of time in Poland, and she's Korean. Right, it's just some of the mixes you get that they're just unbelievable. And so the insights they give you work coming from that environment, even if it's personal or even professional, I think it's really nice, right? But yeah, I think that would be the main answer, right? But in terms of extrovertness, I can probably expand on that a little bit by saying that everyone was super open that way, right? So if you say, hey, I need help with this, they would be help you do cases if they want. You don't have to have had a conversation in the prior. It's just like, yeah, okay, let's just schedule a time, right? Or you can go out, hang out for a beer, or they'll take you to a networking event. So it was really, really inclusive, I think, because of that. Obviously, for us, the P1, P2, when we start is the core, so everyone has to go through that. But P3 to P5 is when you have all the electives, and that's when you start doing the tailoring, right? So, and this is obviously, you can imagine being a one-year program, you do not get the same amount of depth as some of the two-year MBAs. Like it gets to maybe 80% or 75%, let's say. And it's sort of unreasonable to expect that as well. But having said that, the flexibility is there to tailor it. And the path that I personally took was sort of twofold. A, focusing on strategy for sort of an option for consulting. And the B was sort of the entrepreneurship, which is something I had thought about prior to the MBA anyway. So as I had mentioned, one of the electives that I took, which is super, super cool, was it's called the Entrepreneurship Booster. And what they essentially you do is runs from P3 to P5. So let's say about 5 to 6 months, and you only have 1 or 2 lectures per period, right? So in a 10-week period, for instance, you have 1 lecture, and it's all about you taking your idea, right, and then executing it. So then you do the demand validation, you come up with your MVP, and you try to launch something. And at the same time, INSEAD has startup competitions where you can pitch. So I think it's just electives like that allow you that flexibility to tailor it and also learn about entrepreneurship. And because the rest of it was kind of like guest lectures as well, right? So you can take some of the other electives. Unfortunately, because of COVID, some of it was affected, right? So we are supposed to have a field trip to Silicon Valley, for instance, which was affected, right? Which I would have loved to take, but I didn't because of COVID, yeah. So that's something I will probably look into it in the future, right? And it's, a lot of it is because the startup that me and my co-founder were at the time we were looking at would have been severely affected. The timing was not right, let's just say, right? But I would say the main thing it did for me, even prior to coming to the MBA, was now it puts a process behind a startup, right? Of course, there is no one standard process, but let's say if you had to do it, then what would be the 3 or 4 key steps you need to do, right? Which now I have it in my toolkit. So whenever I need it, I can revisit my notes. I can sort of look at, what I did as part of my setup for what I was working on. And I think that would be super helpful for the next iteration or something else I would do in the future, right? For me, I think there was a little bit of a debate, right? One of the other schools I was looking at was also Haas, and I think Berkeley is, right? And they have pretty limited numbers, I think. And it's something I also debated, but at the end of the day, I thought if I'm looking at going to a school which is super international and it's taking so many nationalities, it makes sense to be exposed to all the different nationalities. And so that's why they have the bigger class size, right? And for me, as I said, the gain was, again, not sure if it will hold true always, but now I can go to, let's say, any country, and I would probably have an alumni network over there, right? Or at least someone from my year, from Peru or let's say Greece, who I could connect with, and I could either crash with them or at least they will point me out in where I need to look for a job, for instance, right? So I think that's the advantage, and the way everything is set up. So what they do is they kind of split you in a group of 60 across the 2 campuses. So even though the class size is 500, when you do the swap, you usually have, let's say, 200 to 220 in Singapore, at least in my year. And the remaining 280 odd in Fontainebleau, right? And then on each of that, it's broken up into a class of 60 to 50 to 70, for instance, in 3 streams. And within that, you have a group, right? So it gets really, really structured that way. And so you take your course together this way, right? And then obviously you have all the opportunities to interact, obviously offsite during travels, networking events, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, now you'll get mixed up when you start doing your electives, right? So there are a lot of opportunities to network, right? And believe it's kind of sad that I didn't manage to meet everyone, but I think a lot of it is down to COVID, right? Pre-COVID, we had great trips out to the Philippines, and it was a group of 120, 130 of us, right? So you can kind of imagine where you have such a large group getting together and spending a lot of time together, right? So it is amazing. It really hard to capture in words. So what I did end up doing is, as I said, I put the entrepreneurship journey on hold. So then I just went with my first option, which was consulting. But I didn't want to just go straight with MBB because, again, the work hours and things like that, it's something I value coming from my background. And I also wanted to keep on leveraging the industry knowledge I have, which is in energy. And I think everyone kind of knows these days with climate change and sustainability as a huge factor for a lot of the corporates. This is a huge area for growth. So it took a little bit of time trying to find the perfect fit. Where I am now is in Germany, working with an in-house consultancy called Econ. And they service E.ON, which is one of the top 5, power and gas providers across EU. It's a great company and amazing people to work with as well. And my German is absolutely non-existent, so they were really kind enough to have me on board, and I'm taking some lessons as well. So it's been a great journey. Yes, I think just go for it, right? Because you would, I think, kick yourself by not taking that option. Maybe the ROI, you can really deep dive into the numbers, and you can look at it quantitatively, but I think just the qualitative nature of it is really hard to capture. And having said that, one of the reasons I'm in Europe right now is because of the friendships that I made. Right, and then what I do most every fortnight, I go out to Luxembourg, I go out to London or something like this, just to meet with friends, and these are the connections I'm going to keep for the rest of my life, right? So I think this is something worth thinking about when you do make this decision as well.